Hello and welcome to C-Suite Secrets. I'm Heather Parsons, your host, a serial entrepreneur, fractional CFO, and a business strategist. I've spent years juggling business, a family life, and helping entrepreneurs scale, optimize cash flow, and build real financial success. On our show, we bring you real conversations with founders, executives, and operators who actually move the needle in their business. No fluff, no filler, just smart strategy, systems that work, and insights that you can actually use right away. With that, let's dive right in. Today, we have Jason Reade on our show. Jason's a technology entrepreneur and executive with almost 2 decades of experience at early stage growth startups. He specializes in product and technology strategy, product development, analytics, and he lives in Watertown, Mass. With his wife, 7-year-old twins, and Ruthie, the micro-bernadoodle. Jason, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Ruthie might make an appearance here. She knows how to open doors, so we'll see.
I love it. Our dogs are actually hanging out outside today because they always make an appearance at the most inopportune time. So no problem on that.
Yeah.
So micro Bernie Doodle, huh? So how
Yeah,
big is a micro?
she's 18 pounds, although she gained weight. She's probably 20 pounds at this point. Um, but every bit of Bernie Doodle. So, the cuddly and of the Bernays and way too smart coming from Poodle, so she can open doors and break into food and all sorts of stuff.
I love it. That's great. I'm sure it keeps life interesting for sure.
Yeah, for sure.
So for folks who don't know you, I'd love for you to tell a little bit about your journey and how you become an entrepreneur and what led you to where you are today.
Sure. Yeah. So I'm a self-taught software engineer. I kind of taught myself how to code because I wanted to make some startups when I was in college, and that one thing led to another. I ended up getting a job as a programmer coming out of college. Kind of rose up the ranks. I think largely because I like to say I'm an engineer who speaks business, and I like writing code to solve business problems. A lot of engineers use words that most people don't understand, and they kind of enjoy that. Um, I don't. So I ended up leading the engineering team at a startup here in Boston, and then got poached to become CTO at a fintech company. We were doing automated spreading. Heather, I know you're a fractional CFO, so you would understand and appreciate that for middle market commercial lending. And then COVID hit, so that company kind of blew up overnight, and I had to figure out what to do. So I started consulting. People needed help building apps and stuff, and then I kind of turned that into a niche data fractional head of data, fractional CTO business. I kind of grew a team, essentially helping technology companies measure and optimize their businesses using the latest and greatest data technology. And then the company I run now is called Pliable. We started about 2 years ago, and the idea is it's really expensive to do data well, but we've created technology to actually make it not as expensive. So you don't need a bunch of expensive analysts and data scientists and data engineers just to go and tell you how much money you made last week, right? You can actually do that pretty easily. So we have essentially an AI analyst that sits on top of your business data that can tell you what's going on. And you don't need to hire all those expensive people. So it's kind of a no-brainer if you actually want to do that in real-time analytics.
I love that. I think that's a great journey and getting to the point where businesses are able to make data driven decisions rather than decisions based on emotion is a game changer. And
Yep.
I think with AI and what you're talking about, it really speeds up that process. Usually businesses don't get there until they're in the multi-million dollar phase, and then they start realizing that, hey, making these emotional decisions is really costing me more money than it's making me. So I'd
Yeah.
love to hear you talk a little bit about kind of the journey on how people start using this data and how this AI tool can help and what are some of the KPIs and things you dig into.
Yeah. So a lot of companies, if you're a founder and operator and you've done it before, a lot of times you're aware of how expensive and complicated data is. So you just kind of shove it under the rug and kick the can down the road. Um, but now it's not. I think with the advent of AI, eliminating a lot of the need to hire people to do manual repetitive tasks, plus AI reasoning and intuitive tools and intelligent tools like we have, it actually kind of flips the script, right? So now companies can, what used to cost $500,000 a year in turn teams and technology, they can do with a fraction of that. So it starts with realization, right? Like a lot of companies we say are data driven once a month or once a quarter when they can convince themselves to spend the time gathering all the spreadsheets and putting them together. Um, and what we say and applicable is imagine if you could be data driven in that same way, but like once an hour or once a day, right? Imagine the iteration speed that you can achieve. And and that's an important concept, the iteration speed, because what gets measured gets improved, as the saying goes. And for example, I'll just use a very basic example. If you're an e-commerce company who sells stuff online, and you don't know day over day how your products are selling, you might not be able to react to a major market trend until the end of the month when you go and pay Heather to do your books or whatever, right?
Yep.
So at that point, it might be too late. Like something might have happened on the third day of the month, and you won't see it. So it's if you think about like the ability to react to things that are happening and make changes in your business, the sooner you have that data that's telling you the story, the sooner you can react, and the sooner you can test whether your reaction was actually moving the needle in the way that you wanted. So getting to real time or near real time insights is crucial in today's day and age. And the question then is, okay, what are you supposed to measure, right? And I'll give you the answer I
Absolutely.
give everybody. It depends on the business. But if you think about a business as a money printing machine, that's what they all are, right? You do stuff at the top, you pour money in, and you get ideally more money out. If you're not getting more money out, then you got to find another way to shift your business. So there's various things you can measure about a business regardless of what kind of business it is, right? How much money is coming in and how much money are you spending? And then at a high level, that's what the business needs to be, right? So if you're measuring what your cash flow is, and how much you're spending, how much you're making, and you're breaking that down day over day or week over week, that's a lot easier to go and plan and predict and react than it is if you're just looking at monthly or quarterly or even yearly, as some companies do. And then the specifics of what KPIs you should measure tend to be determined by the business. So if you're an e-commerce company, if you're running ads, you want to know how many people are clicking on your ads, how many people are seeing your ads, which ads are leading to the most revenue. And then you can go and spend more money on the ads that are working and less money on the ads that aren't working. You want to be able to measure the effectiveness of your team, right? How much you're spending on your team. And if you can attach a dollar value to their output, right? Sometimes it's easy, sometimes it's hard. But the act of thinking about that is usually the most important part, because it forces you to objectively look at your business and therefore you can make objective decisions, right? It's easy to say, hey, this person, I like this person, and they're doing a good job. But if you force yourself to measure it, you might show that they're not doing a good job, or they're in fact doing a really good job, and then you can make decisions based on that.
I love that, and I think whether it's people, whether it's products, whatever you're looking at, I would agree 100% that just the act of thinking about it and the taking the time to measure it changes how you think about it. People is a good example because it's a little bit harder to quantify, right? So you can say,
Mm-hmm.
okay, Bill, he's great, but what does Bill actually deliver? It's a little
Yep.
bit harder to say that about people than it is about, okay, this ad's getting clicked on, that we're generating revenue with it. But to go back to something you said a little bit ago, I think that's very important for all entrepreneurs to understand. It's getting to that almost real time data.
Mm-hmm.
So whether Bill's getting real time feedback or we're figuring out how ads are performing, it's that data that's making the decisions and we're actually looking at it that I think drives the needle in business. So I'd
Absolutely.
love to hear a little bit about your thoughts on where that data is coming from, how you make sure it's clean, and something that you can actually make decisions around.
Sure. So a lot of businesses are run out of Excel, right?
Yep.
But now, especially with AI, it's actually pretty easy to talk to an AI agent and have it create a system for you. That's basically a custom built app, right? So it used to be you would have to go and sign up for Salesforce or HubSpot. And there's frankly like a lot of really good SaaS tools, which I think most businesses should use. Um, but you can, to my point about AI, you can actually create your own kind of mechanism for running your business, even if it's unique to you. But regardless of where that is, the data needs to live somewhere, and it needs to be uniform, right? And that's like a real challenge for people, accounting wise.
Oh
Things
yeah.
are there's a dollar amount, and then the question is, what was this spent on, and where did this come from, and how should I tie everything together? There's a lot of room for error there, right? And an AI or a database or a dashboard or whatever you use to measure your business is only as effective as the cleanliness of the data that it has, right? So what I tell all of our customers is, hey, you're going to have to spend some time probably changing your habits to make sure that the data that you're producing in your CRM or in your accounting system or in your, if you run a tech company, in your product database or in your ad platform, the data needs to be consistent and uniform. Because what you want to be able to do is compare apples to apples. If this customer owed you money last week and the same customer but slightly misspelled last name owes you money this week, it's probably relevant that it's the same person or the same company, but the data is not going to necessarily be able to show that, right? So that's huge. A lot of companies would go and buy like a BI tool, business intelligence tool. You may have heard of like Power BI or Looker or Tableau, one of those things. They kind of promise the world, right? You get like really sexy dashboards showing
Oh,
everything that's
yeah.
going on in your business in real time. But there's a big asterisk there, and it's as long as your data is well organized and clean, right? So usually you'd have to pay data engineers to like write code to pull data out of different places, centralize it, clean it, normalize it, and structure it, remove duplicates, just so you can go and plug it into a dashboard. But now we're into the phase where AI can actually assist with a lot of that. There's still some manual stuff, and you still do need to change your habits. But it's reducing the barrier to entry. So now smaller companies can actually go and do data the right way, so to speak.
I love that smaller companies can start doing data the right way. I think that's a great place to start because from an accounting perspective, what I really see is exactly what you were talking about initially. They may do it once a quarter, once whenever they're really worried about it, then they'll start looking and at that point you have such a mess to clean up.
Mm-hmm.
It's virtually impossible to get back ahead,
Yep.
so a couple of things that I always recommend, especially on things that really matter, like your accounting, operational things that you're really measuring, once a week. Just take the 15 minutes and do it once a week, and then it's not insurmountable. You can
Mm-hmm.
actually do something with the data. It's there and ready if you need whatever you need to do with it, whether it's get a bank loan, whether it's rate the performance of your people, whatever it is. That 15 to 30 minutes can really save you a lot of time, money, and energy in the long run.
It's like cleaning your house, like if you let your house get too dirty, it becomes insurmountable. But if you clean it, if you can clean it when you see a mess, even better. But if you make an effort to spend 10 minutes a day even cleaning your house, it's going to pay dividends in the long term.
That's for sure. For me, it's laundry. I spend 30 minutes doing laundry and then it's done because I know
Exactly.
it's something that I hate to do and it's painful. And I think, KPIs and looking at the numbers and the data is that way for a lot of entrepreneurs. It's just one more thing that they have to do in their already busy schedule. So I love the way you're putting that together.
Hmm.
So when it comes to KPIs, what have you seen as well where it may initially look good and then you start digging into the information and the numbers and you're like, okay, that's really not good outside of the data being clean?
That's a good question. So it really comes down to like how you define things, right? So back to my point about like how you define revenue, right? We have this conversation all the time with our customers, which is like, okay, you want to track total sales. What does it actually mean? Does it mean on the day you sent the invoice? Does it mean on the day that the customer sent an email saying they wanted to purchase something? Do you count it on the day that the cash hit the bank, right? And those are all valid ways of counting revenue, right? Um, but so what you could have is, thinking in terms of cash flow, if you're doing accrual accounting, you could count revenue on the day that you send the invoice, which is what QuickBooks would do automatically for you if you're doing accrual. And you look at your metrics and you say, wow, I'm killing it, right? But then you go and look at your cash in the bank and you say, hey, how come I have barely anything in there? Well, it's because you're booking revenue on the day you sent out the invoice and not the day that the cash hit your bank. Um, so accrual accounting is really good for tracking like trends and sales and those sorts of things. But if you're actually looking to make decisions around cash flow, you probably need to measure it differently, right? So I've seen a lot of customers, um, get that wrong is a good example. Also, things like um, ad attribution is a big one where people tend to like get really wrong, which is like it's basically the question of when someone makes a purchase, which of your ads or which of your marketing activities led them to making a purchase, right? And there's all sorts of hypotheses and theories on how you should do it. There's this concept called first touch, which is like the first ad they saw gets all the, gets accounted for all the revenue that it drove, or it's the last touch, the last ad they saw before making a purchase. Or it's multi-touch, like you sent them an email, they opened it, they called you, then they went to your event, and they, all these things. Um, it's very easy for especially marketing teams in that sense to like define the KPIs in ways that make them look good, but doesn't actually tell like the full story, right? So you can say like my ads are working because a lot of people are clicking on it, or I've rigged up my attribution so it's first touch, so it's saying that the ad that I wanted to run is the one that led to all my revenue. But clearly that's not necessarily the case. So I think the biggest way to like address this problem is to have a shared understanding of like what your definition of total sales is, or what your definition of your attributed ad campaign is. And it's going to be like a debate, right? Your marketing team wants to look at things one way, your finance team wants to look at things another way. But like the CEO wants to make sure that everybody's looking at the same numbers, because there's a bunch of smart people in the room and they need to react to those numbers. And it needs to be the same. Otherwise, they're going to react differently. One team might think they're performing well. The other team might think they're performing not so well. So having that shared understanding and shared definition is crucial. It's called like metric governance in my data nerd world. But it's like, what do these things mean and how do we want to track them?
I think that is a great piece of advice. Really looking at the definition of around your KPIs, what you're tracking, what each of those pieces of information mean is crucial. I love your example around the accrual accounting. I think a lot of people, when they set their QuickBooks up, they let it help them initially, and then
Mm-hmm.
that's just what they are used to, and they don't really take the time to go back and look at it. But to your point, if people will take the time and go back and set some of these definitions up, write it down, make sure everybody's on the same page, they'll save themselves a lot of heartache in the long run.
Yeah, and it really like just defining it's not hard, right? It's just like you have to take that step. You can even do it in Excel. But what you're doing is you're setting up, back to my previous point about a business being a money printing machine, you're setting up the ways in which you're measuring the effectiveness of that money printing machine, right? And the more granular you can get, the better you can tell the story and identify bottlenecks and areas that are working and aren't working. But it just starts with defining those things and like having a rigid process around like like at my company like once a week we review all the metrics. And if we wanted to, because we use Pliable to run Pliable, so all the metrics are there when we need it. But we pull it up once a week and we review it all, because it eliminates all ego, it eliminates all like storytelling and all that stuff. It's just like the metrics are the metrics, and you can debate whether that's the right metric to use. But it keeps things objective and it keeps emotions out of it, and it helps you run a business super effectively.
I love that. And I love that you're using your own tools to run your own business. So, one of the questions I always get asked, so I'm going to ask you too. So, as you're doing this review every week, what are the top 2 or 3 metrics that you're looking at to check on the health of your business?
So we break it down into pre-sales, post-sales, and sometimes high level strategy, fundraising, that sort of thing. But pre-sales is how many leads are we generating, and how quickly and what percentage are we moving from stage to stage in our sales funnel, right? So like the first stage is, this is a lead that may have filled out a form on our website, or we heard from somebody, and our goal is to get as many of those as possible into the next stage so that we have a conversation with them. So we're measuring how many leads do we add this week and how many of those previous leads from last week moved into this next stage, all the way to how many are we converting. And that's essentially like we don't really get into the effectiveness of ads that we're running and that sort of thing, because we're a small company. There's whole like data science teams that are creating algorithms and stuff just to do that. But really, like, we know if we if leads ticked up that week, we know what we were doing to make them tick up, right? And it just forces that discussion, because we see how many leads do we have last week, how many leads do we have this week. Well, clearly there's a jump. What led to that jump? We spend a minute discussing it, and it's usually like, all right, do more of that or less of that, right? And then the post-sales side is, okay, once people convert and agree to pay for our platform, then the question is, how satisfied are they? So we do customer satisfaction surveys and stuff like that. We also track how often like our engineering team is introducing issues into the code, right? So we track like defect rate. We also track how quickly our engineering team is able to turn around new features. right? So between the time that we put it on the list to go and do and the time that it's actually shipped, our goal is to get that time down, because it means we can react to customer and market needs more effectively. And then there's also like, okay, if someone's up for renewal, how many people are up for renewal, what's the projected revenue if we close them or upsell them, or if they churn, those sorts of things. But you can really distill it down to like those three buckets. There's probably like 5 or 6 metrics within each of those buckets that we look at. But then what's cool about if you organize your data effectively, you can look at a high level metric, total revenue, and you can say, okay, how much of that is from subscriptions versus how much of that is from one-offs, right? And you can, with a tool like Pliable, you can drill in. You should have that question, but sometimes it's difficult to go and answer that question, and you don't want to bug your analyst even if you have an analyst to go and answer that. But now with these sorts of tools, you can drill in, and it'll show you, hey, 20% subscription, 80% ad hoc. That's a lot less reliable cash flow wise than the reverse, and that might influence the strategic direction that you take.
For sure. And whenever we talk about that monthly recurring revenue number, that drives so many different things, especially if you're looking for an exit or you're looking for investors. All of those numbers apply there. So I think
Mm-hmm.
it's super crucial to take the time as you're starting out with your business, do the separation. It takes a little bit more time, but in the end, it's totally worth it. And thinking about it from a cash flow forecasting perspective, it's really easy to say, okay, this monthly recurring revenue, I can forecast that out for the length of the contract. However, this one-off stuff, if that's the majority of what my, revenue is made up of, I'm really going to have to work a lot harder
Yeah, you need
because
a
now
bigger
I got to
risk
go get
tolerance
that.
built in. Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
Now I got to go get that all the time. So I think knowing those numbers is
Yep.
crucial.
And it forces the discussion, right? It's important, like, because if you see it, you're going to talk about it, right? So I encourage everyone on my team and everyone I talk to, like, even if it's just one number, like put it up in front of you and look at it before you go to, before you sign in that day, because it'll influence what you're doing. Um, and one other thought on that concept is like, if you look at your business as like a mathematical formula, it's a function of how much money's coming in, how much you're spending, what your engineering efficiency is, how many leads are coming into the funnel, and how many are converting, so on and so forth. You don't have to define it as a math problem, right? But then what you start to do is you create this concept of like a metric tree, where like the overall metric is business success, right? And obviously that's subjective, but the more granular you get, the more quantitative and objective you can get. So like, that your success is a function of number of leads, the number of sales, the number of satisfied customers, and how quickly you're shipping new features, or how quickly you're responding to customer requests, or anything like that. Those are all indicators of you doing a good job or doing a bad job. So like, no matter what your business is, if you've been doing it for more than a month or two, you could probably go and write down all the different things that you would measure, if you could, to go and tell you whether your business is on the right track.
For sure. And then it makes these other questions that I always get from clients much easier. So if you know these things are working, now you want to talk about hiring more people, or are you being efficient, right? So it kind of answers a lot of those questions for you
Mm-hmm.
because hey, am I going to be able to afford this? Yeah, if I have all monthly recurring revenue, I know what I'm doing. I know that my engineering department's is killing it over here. I've got leads in the pipeline. It's a lot easier to answer that question than to get the cold, I mean, can I afford it? Like, I don't know.
Right. And you're making a
Like we
decision
got we
like
got to
that.
look at this for a minute.
Exactly. So, and I'm guilty of that too. Like, I make gut decisions, and it's because I don't have the data, and I've been forcing myself, especially now that we have this tool that we built, to go and do that. Like, you should be able to go and get the data. If you can't get the data, then you should postpone that decision, because the risk of making the wrong decision, even if you wait a day before making the right decision, is so high, right? So, and the trick, back to my earlier point, is if you can cut down the time it takes to go and get the data to help you make that decision, then there's no reason not to be data driven. But the primary barrier has always been, I have to pay a data team and all these crazy people using a bunch of words that I don't understand in order to go and just get me the data to help me make my decision. I'm just going to go with my gut. That's what a lot of business owners do.
Right. And it makes sense whenever it's such a barrier there. But I think if I boil it down, it's all about kind of beginning with the end in mind. kind of
Hmm.
thinking about where you want to go in your business from the beginning and trying to put some of those tools in place, like whether it's a tool like Pliable, whether it's making sure your accounting's good, setting up EOS, whatever you're using,
Yep.
just be consistent and do something.
Yeah, set up a process. I think every entrepreneur wants to eventually manage him or herself out of the business. So if you
Yep.
set up a process early on, there's an early stage where you're still figuring stuff out, and it doesn't make sense to put measurements in place. But once you kind of have a somewhat repeatable process, like you want to put all those, at least start tracking those things, because then what you can do is have a playbook, right? If a certain metric goes up or goes down, like here's the way I look at it, and you can go on vacation for once, right? Like I had that problem at a bunch of companies now where like if I went on vacation, like everything stopped because it's all in here. So if you can put it into as much as you can into a mathematical formula, then it makes it easier to scale for sure.
Absolutely. We all want to be able to take that vacation and,
Right.
get a little disconnect time and set up our life for what we started the business for in the first place.
Yeah. I think it's
So,
rare that people start business for the sake of starting businesses. They have a goal in mind.
absolutely. And it's really easy to forget that because you go from thinking about the business and envisioning what you want it to look like to really being in the trenches day to day.
Hmm.
So having that time to step back is crucial. And one other question that I have for you, I'd love to hear what's one tool or system that you've put in place over the last 12 to 24 months that's really helped your business?
Um, Great question. I'm probably going to have the same answer as most people these days, which is AI is really good if you know how to use it. So we've been using it in a couple places. So one is for those of us who do write code, which is me included, we're at the point now where you can use AI coding assistants to essentially like 10x your output. Right. So what I used to have to do if I had a team of junior engineers, I would give them assignments, and at the end of the week, I would kind of review and consolidate all that. That happens now within an hour span because I'm just kind of telling the AI what to do. But that can be applied to other areas besides just coding. So like I've seen a lot of people get lazy and they use ChatGPT to like write blog articles for them. You can see right through that, and I think most of
Everybody
us are
knows.
certain
Yeah,
exactly.
everybody
But
knows.
what we've been doing is, for example, like we're going to a conference next week, and we're deciding what goes on our little looping video on the TV, and we agreed on a message. So we asked Claude, in this case, with like a ChatGPT competitor, hey, can you help me simplify this for this sort of audience? And it didn't like write it from scratch. It took something that we wrote, but it like simplified it. It gave me some options, and we were interacting with it as if it was like a writing coach. And we got to the point where it didn't sound like an AI wrote it, but it was much better than what we initially wrote because we're not writing professionals necessarily. So it's like I want to call it like intelligent, pointed uses of AI in our day-to-day work, just to help move things along and avoid. Like we could spend 3 hours workshopping a message, or you can give it to three different LLMs, and it might come back with three different messages, and you can kind of pick and choose from there. It's all about iteration speed.
Absolutely. And I think regardless of the business, I mean, I know I use AI a ton in my business, exactly how you're talking about, whether it's through Claude, Chat GPT, whatever it's through, to just polish things and change it
Hmm.
up a little. I think in the tech space and in accounting and other very technical fields, it's genius because a lot of my messaging will be full of technical terms and I'll
Hmm.
ask it to rewrite it for an eighth grader,
Yep.
and that way it's like there's no question. Now it's super simple and it would have taken me forever to figure it out, or I would have given you a bunch of jargon and nobody needs that either. So I think
Yeah.
it's great to speed that up and to really get clarity around your message.
One of the things I had to learn trying to sell Pliable to non-technical buyers is like how to speak their language and not data language, right? So, LLMs speak both languages, and it's very easy to say like, hey, here's what I would say in data speak, semantic layers and ETL and data warehouses and all this stuff that doesn't mean anything to anybody else outside of our little bubble. It actually is pretty good at like dumbing it down to your point. That's probably a bad term to use, but simplifying it. Yes. So an eighth grader can understand, or your target audience can understand.
Right. And I find that, asking it that question is not necessarily dumbing it down. It's just reframing it a little bit.
Hmm.
It still gets a very clear message across. It just doesn't use the same language. It doesn't use those highly technical terms like what you just spouted a second ago. I'll be Googling, like, what does this actually
Yeah, yeah,
mean? And, trying to figure it out, looking to educate myself on it. But whenever you break it down into something very common, I don't have to do that anymore. And it makes me trust what you're saying a lot more
yeah.
because I don't have to think about it and worry, like, do I not understand this?
Right. So you don't want to get too reliant on it. But I think the way that you're using it and the way that we're using it is the right way, which is like use it to speed things up and to make your message sound better. And then it's actually getting good at technical things too, like writing code is the example I gave. Um, they're getting to the point where they could like analyze a data set, although like you need that perfect Excel spreadsheet with everything all nicely formatted and organized, which nobody ever has, which is why we exist, right? Um, or there's been talk about AI starting to do some basic like closing the books, reconciling purchases and that sort of
Mhm.
thing, which like those are repetitive things that a human would normally have to do. And I think what it's doing is it's emphasizing the creativity and critical thinking of the people, and then it's allowing us to have like an army of underlings that just do one thing really, really well.
For sure. And I think to your point on the whole closing the books, it goes back to your definition on what does that mean? What does
Right.
it mean to close the books? What are you really looking for? Stuff like that is just becomes more and more important and being more clear in what you're asking. So I love it. I think that's great. What would you suggest that small business owners, if they needed to implement something today in their business, what would be the one thing that you would recommend that they implement to get better at data, to get better at moving towards KPIs and using a system like Pliable?
I think you got to first understand what moves the needle in your business, right? Pick three. I've read a lot about, and I tend to agree that like anything more than three KPIs, even though I just said we use 10, right? But like anything more than three is gonna be kind of overwhelming, because what you want to do is be able to glance at it and know whether you're trending up or trending down, essentially. Um, so if you can look at your business objectively and say these are the key numbers that decide whether I would determine whether my business is good or bad. Um, Write those down, and then your next task is figuring out how you go and calculate those numbers. And it's going to be a manual effort. But what you'll do is you'll identify, oh, I need to get data from my accounting system. I need to go and get data from my CRM. I need to go and get data from, Bob, right? So, and then because I can't help you with that, right? The Once we go and I can walk you through that process, but once we go and identify, here are the ways that I want to track your business, and here's where that data lives, then it can be automated, right? So then you can say, okay, instead of doing this once a month because it takes me 10 hours to go and gather all the data, I can do it once a day because it takes 10 minutes and just have to click a button, right? That's when it becomes life changing. But that first step, that desire to be data driven, and that forcing yourself to think about your business as like a mathematical formula or as assembly line, is crucial. And only you know your business, right? No, like I know about businesses like yours, but everybody's an expert in their own business, and they can tell more better than anybody, like, here's what success means to me. And then from there, now that we have these sorts of tools, boom, you can get your health dashboards and all that stuff. I don't want to say easily because it undermines the technology we built, but you can get it a lot quicker, and you don't have to wait for data analysts every time you have a question.
That's a great point. And I think having that understanding is really drives not only what drives your business, but how you think about your business, to your point earlier. And I think it's super smart to spend some time this week, think about those top three things. And I always love to throw a plug out there for looking at your cash flow. If you're struggling to make payroll every week, you know where you need to dive in. If you're having a hard time bringing in, new leads, maybe you need to focus on marketing. So you've got to know all of these interconnecting parts before you can get to the end of the assembly line.
Yep. And keep it in a high level, because if you struggle to make payroll, your next question is, okay, are there things that I can wait on paying, or are there invoices I need to go and chase, or are there ways that I can get a loan or whatever to bridge my cash flow gap? Those are all questions that someone like you, Heather, would be able to pose, but only once you see that, hey, you have this cash flow problem. And that comes from measuring those things.
Exactly. And then getting to those solutions is a lot easier whenever you're looking at that high level data rather than saying, hey, I'm not making payroll, but I don't really know why. I just know
Hmm.
that I bring a lot of money in and I have no money at the end of the day. So we want to figure
Right.
out what's going on there in the middle and make it as quickly as possible.
Yep. And I'd learned that the hard way when I was doing my own accounting, my previous business, but I'd survived somehow.
Yeah, that's why we're here to help. We want to make
Yeah.
sure that we streamline that and make it as simple as possible. I truly believe in the bottom of my heart that entrepreneurs should not have to be everything all the time. Shouldn't have to be a CTO. You shouldn't have to be, a CFO. You should be really good at what you're doing and focus on that and leave the more technical aspects to people who do that day in and day out.
Yeah. You design the system, you know how the business is supposed to work. If you create those KPIs and you're able to objectively measure everyone who you hired and everything that you're doing, and then, it's still hard, but at least you have the benefit of being data driven and then knowing what's going on before most companies do.
Absolutely. So, one last question I always love to ask. So, what's one secret you wish you would have known before you become an entrepreneur and started your business?
Huh. I mean, everybody says this, but it's way harder than it seems like. Because I had a relatively cushy career just writing code for other people, right? And I'm a I'm a type A, and I don't think there was any other. I don't regret it, but like I wish I could give myself a pep talk, like, dude, you're gonna run into all of these issues, and you gotta just like keep your head up and keep swimming. But also like it took me a while, like even though we're a data company, like it took me a while to like really figure out like we have to organize the company in this way in order to achieve success. And it all comes down to removing the subjectivity from the equation, right? Because like I get passionate, everybody gets passionate. If you can use data to remove that, then you're more likely to make the right strategic decisions. And it's hard to do because all of us are cocky and arrogant and whatever as entrepreneurs, right? But you gotta do that if you're gonna be successful.
For sure. And I think just to add one thing that I've noticed as an entrepreneur and with other entrepreneurs, we all seem to like what we like doing. We like to do what that is, and things that are a little bit more difficult and complicated, maybe not get touched quite so often.
Yep.
Well, this has been great. I really loved the conversation. So if folks want to learn a little bit more about what you're doing or how to get in contact with you, how's the best way to reach out?
You can go to pliable.co, co, and pliable like the word in the dictionary. That'll give you can reach out to us via there. You can also email me at jason@pliable.co, and I will be happy to get your email and happy to help you. Even if it's not using our platform, I just like helping people figure out their data problems, which my CFO gets mad at me because it's not billable hours, but it is what it is. Happy to help.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. And thank you, everybody, for listening. If you found today's conversation as valuable as I have, it would mean the world to me if you would hit that like and follow button. Until next time, keep growing. And remember, you don't have to do this alone.